Last night I finished reading 40,000 in Gehenna by Cherryh. This is the first of her books that I've read. I own, I think, five or six more, and I'm probably going to read some of them this year. But this book and most, I think maybe even all of the books that I own from her take place in her Alliance Union universe. So before I get into the specific plot of this book, I'll kind of summarize the backstory of that setting. So basically, in the future, humanity colonizes the galaxy, and this happens under the leadership of the Earth Company. But at first, there's no faster than light travel, so the farther out the colonies get, the less logistically possible it is for them to actually receive and follow orders from Earth. So um, they become like de facto independent, but then faster than light travel gets discovered. Earth tries to use that to reassert control over the colonies. Colonies don't like it. They have a rebellion. They create the Union, which is the political organization of all these colonies. Um, so that's one of the major political forces in her setting. And then the other one is the Alliance, which comes from, as all of that's developing between Earth and the colonies, there's this other culture of humans who live and work on the spaceships that conduct trade between all the colonies or between the colonies and Earth. And they create their own political organization to protect their unique interests, and they're called the Mercanter Alliance. So that's why it's called the Alliance Union Universe. Um, and the Union wins their war against Earth. So in the books that are later in the chronology, which I mean most of them take place after the war, and Earth is not really um, a force at all. Like Earth is never even mentioned in this book, except as like they mention like, oh, this is a thing from old stories on Earth, but they don't like talk about Earth as a political entity, because it's not really a thing for them anymore. Uh, but yeah, so in this book, the Union is setting up a colony on a habitable planet, that's kind of far out from the center of their territory, and it's actually very close to Alliance territory. Um, and the this book follows like roughly 300 years. Well, most of the story takes place over a 200-year period, and then there's like a little epilogue that takes place another century after that. So we'll say it's like 300 years of the history of this colony. Um, Basically, the Union is setting up this colony, but what they don't tell the colonists is that they're not going to like offer continued support. They're just creating basically a human population that's going to be difficult to control when they inevitably cede this planet to the Alliance because it's so close to Alliance territory, and they're like, we're probably going to have to give this to them in a treaty at some point, but we're going to like leave a deliberately failed colony there, that's going to create this population that'll be annoying for them. Um, so that's kind of a fun premise. This human colony that's about to get abandoned, unbeknownst to them. There's also at the start of the book, and I think this is probably discussed more in some of C.J. Cherryh's other books because it's really only relevant in the first maybe 50 pages of this, but there's this social dynamic between um, humans who were born the normal way, and they're called born men, versus the AZI, AZI, which I believe is an acronym for something, which are clones. Um, and I think one of her books is called Cytine, and I think that one is largely about the the political and ethical issues around the cloning. Um, because it's kind of dropped in this book, which I mean makes sense. After a couple generations, that distinction would stop mattering because there's no cloning going on the colony planet. Um, and the clones and their descendants intermarry with the born men and their descendants, so it really doesn't matter after a while. But yeah, the social stratification between Born Men and Azzy is like kind of a thing at the start of this book that I thought was going to go somewhere interesting and then it didn't. Um, so I think I'll be looking for that in some of her other books. But this planet is populated by these creatures depicted on the really fun cover here. This is the painter's name was Ron Wolotsky. I don't know if he's still around, but I love this cover. This is a book club edition, which I know um, book collectors don't like those because they look like first editions, but they're not, and they're usually printed on slightly cheaper materials. Um, I don't really care. I mean, I'm not like beating my books up that bad to where the cheaper material would make a noticeable difference to me. And the book club editions usually look cool, so and they're pretty easy to find in secondhand shops. So I have most of the CJ Cherryh books that I have are book club editions, hardcovers. But where was I going? Oh yeah, so the Calibans. These creatures are called Calibans. The humans name them that after the character from The Tempest by William Shakespeare. There's the giant brown ones. There's the smaller gray ones, which I think my one criticism of this painting, for the most part, it looks like the painter actually read the book, but I think this gray guy is a little too small because even the grays are said to be like significantly larger than humans. And then the browns are much bigger than the grays, but maybe not quite as big as the painter has depicted. But anyways, there's the Calibans that come in two different sizes and colors, and then there's this tiny little guy. These are called Ariels, also named after the character from The Tempest. Um, and at first, they are thought to be like unintelligent, just animals. But slowly over the centuries, humans begin to understand that, um, well, the Ariels are not very smart, but the Calibans are. They have some degree of intelligence, and they can even kind of communicate with each other and with people through like these patterns that they make. Like they draw patterns in the dirt, they make patterns out of rocks that they give to each other, and they make patterns on the surface of the planet out of walls that they build and mounds. Um, which they're doing that from the start, but it takes a long time for the humans to clock that it's like almost a form of language. Um, but yeah, so the human society within like a generation after they realize they're not going to get support from the union, it begins to kind of degrade. They kind of stop using what little technology they brought with them. They kind of revert to sort of almost feudalism. They split off into different subgroups as well. Um, and then eventually in the second half of the book, there's these two feudal like countries almost um, on two different rivers around the area where the colonists first landed. And Cherry does some really interesting speculative anthropology with the cultures of these two groups and how they have a different relationship with gender in the two cultures. They have a different relationship with the Calibans. Also, aside from these two like civilizations, there's also a certain number of humans who begin to live like the Calibans and live amongst the Calibans in their burrows. And the humans who still live in a sort of civilization refer to these other humans as the Weirds. And they are there like very early on. Like the first, not the colonists who landed, but the first generation after them, a bunch of their children start disappearing and going to live in the Caliban mounds and burrows. And that population like continues to multiply, but also like more humans from each generation. Like there's a certain percentage, like if you have three or four kids on this planet, one of them is probably going to go and become a weird and live with the Calibans. Um, and so towards the end of the book, um, the Alliance takes over, and then they send scientists to the planet to try to study this human population and try to figure out like because it's almost like a first contact situation, but they're humans, they've just forgotten their relationship to the rest of us and they have their own culture on this planet that's developed after this colony got abandoned, but they are humans. So what do you do with that? Um, So they send scientists there to kind of study them and try to figure out what they're going to do. And one of the scientists is a major POV character in the second half of the book, and she speculates that maybe like the weirds are it's almost like there's a psychological disorder that's unique to this planet that's created by the environment of this planet that causes the humans to forget that they are a human and believe that they're a Caliban. So that was really interesting. Yeah, so I would say mostly this book is like it's speculative anthropology, how would human culture change and what different types of human civilization might develop on this planet alongside these intelligent lizard beasts. Um, and yeah, you just get to follow a couple centuries of that, which is really fun. It made me start playing Dwarf Fortress again, and I should probably get RimWorld as well and start playing that. I haven't played RimWorld yet, but yeah, just the idea of like watching this colony develop over generations, and like how they tackle different problems. It made me want to play Dwarf Fortress again. So I've been playing a lot of Dwarf Fortress the past couple days in between reading this. Yeah, so I want to read some of her books that deal with the earlier chronology of the setting, like the war between the Union and the Earth Company. I have a couple of those. I have Down Below Station, and then I have a bunch of her Merchanter novels. So I'm gonna read those soon, probably. Um, and then I have uh, another book of hers called Serpent's Reach, which is kind of similar to this one. It's about a human colony that develops parallel to this intelligent native species on the planet, and it kind of shapes their society in a really interesting way. So I want to read that as well. And then I also have she has a couple of fantasy series, but not all, but I think most of her fantasy series are set on planets within her Alliance Union universe. So it's kind of part of that sci-fi setting, but it's a fantasy series. So I have one of those. I have the Morgaine trilogy. I'm going to read that, I think, as well, maybe at some point this year. But yeah, I think I need to get back into sci-fi because this was a lot of fun. I haven't really read any science fiction in like over a year. Um, yeah, I mean I've been very deep in like a literary fiction. I always feel like I sound pretentious when I make that distinction between literary fiction and genre fiction, but it's like it sounds pretentious, but how else do you make that distinction? Like, there's not another word for that. So, anyways, I've been deep into that stuff for about a year, still reading fantasy here and there, but I hadn't read any science fiction in like over a year. And then I picked this up and really enjoyed it. So, I'm gonna do some more science fiction stuff. I still have to read, like my most popular YouTube video is There Is No Anti-Memetics Division. And I have to read the new edition of that came out that's like standalone IP and it's not like part of the SCP universe anymore. I got to read that because I have that. Um, I have the original one that I read that you can't get anymore. And then I have the new edition that's like standalone IP that you can get this one because it came out last year. And it's still in print. But yeah, uh, so maybe I'll do that at some point this year as well. But yeah, to summarize my thoughts on 40,000 in Gehenna, great cover. Love a vintage sci-fi or fantasy cover with the painting. Um, Loved the anthropological stuff going on. I think the second half of the book could have been edited down a little bit. Because like the first half of the book, you have a big time jump, like every 30 or 40 pages. The second half of the book is a long, like half of the book. This is like a 300 something page book, so you got like 150 pages of just one um, group of characters in one particular time period. And the middle of that got a little repetitive, and it felt like this could have been edited a little bit. But overall, I liked it. I think I gave it like 4 stars on Goodreads, and I think I stand by that. And yeah, I do recommend it, and I'm gonna read some more from her soon.